Welcome for some more affordable folding knife content. And yes, that often does mean a knife made in China, maybe not the best materials, best fit and finish. And I have certainly heard a lot of negative opinions about Chinese-made products, so please let's just not go there today. Because if you're on a budget like I am, it's really hard to justify spending a couple $100s or more on an EDC that you're going to use hard, beat up, maybe even lose. So if you can find something good quality that works for you for $100 or significantly less in some cases, why not go for it? And if you've been following my channel, we've certainly looked at a lot of folding knives in that price range that were surprisingly awesome. A few months ago, I got a couple of samples from Valhalla knives on Amazon. Specifically, their Pastor 1 and 2. And this is the 2. I like this one better. And I still do put it to some use. I carry it occasionally. It does otherwise kind of live on my desk as a utility knife. It certainly is an awesome letter opener. But one thing I found I don't like about these symmetrical knives in folders is that I fumble the opening. What am I talking about? Well, unless I can see or feel which side the liner lock is on, or remember which side I should be feeling the pocket clip on, sometimes I'm sitting here just struggling with this, wondering why it's stuck, until I realize, well, Mike's trying to open it backwards. But I was impressed enough with Valhalla's quality, especially for the price, that I went ahead and spent my own money on their T-Rex. Now, one of the reasons I bought the T-Rex is its obvious resemblance to the Cold Steel Espada, which is still my favorite EDC, even though it's more than $100. This is smaller. It is a liner lock, not a triad lock, but it is surprisingly good quality. I carry it a lot. I use it a lot. I really love this knife, especially for what I paid for it. But one thing I've mentioned in my reviews about these knives with these sort of Navaja, really strongly recurved grips, is there's certain things these are great for and certain things they straight up get in the way of, including, in this case, it tends to make for a very wide carry in the pocket, combined with this being a very solid, heavy knife. Yeah, so thinking about maybe something slimmer. And speaking of slimmer and affordable, you've been following the channel, I've been reviewing a lot of affordable, smallish field utility knives with these kind of Puko style narrow profiles. And I found them to be very, very useful as field utility knives, but also potentially as martial tools. Basically a really keen, sharpened spike. So I'm thinking, well, what about a folder about this big and this blade profile? Would that work for me as well as this as a fixed blade? So I went back to Valhalla because there was a knife in their catalog I had my eye on for a while, and that was what they call their Pterosaur. And spoiler alert, for the less than $35 US that I paid for the thing, it is an awesome folding knife. All right, let's go ahead and get straight into the specs, the design, and the fit and finish. I already mentioned that when I bought it, I paid less than $35 US for it. I'll put the link in the description. For that, I am getting a D2 steel blade that my test files are confirming somewhere just above 60 HRC, which is what they advertise it to be. But speaking of steel, a lot of steel in the friendly end. It is a liner lock with an open pillar construction, and for a pocket carry knife, I really like that open pillar design to help me clean the gunk out. But those are full steel liners. And speaking of steel, okay, I expected these gray finish bolsters to be anodized aluminum, but no, my magnets are confirming those are also steel, as is the low profile carry pocket clip that also has that gray finish for reduced visibility. Speaking of gray finish, it comes with a pair of linen micarta grip scales. But other specifications, all right. Fully opened, overall length is 9 1/4 inches, 24 centimeters. Yes, I'm looking down at my notes to give you the metric as well as the imperial. Now the blade itself is 4 inches, 10 centimeters long, with a width at the widest point right here before the clip point drops off. That's 1 1/8 inches, 3 centimeters, with a stock thickness of 3.2 millimeters. Folded in the pocket, it is 5 3/8 inch long, about 13.5 centimeters, with a width at the widest point, that's about 1 7/16 of an inch, or 3.7 centimeters, with a thickness, not including the pocket clip, 15 millimeters. So kind of slim, but you know, it's still kind of chunky, certainly, well, lower profile in the pocket than something like the T-Rex. But let's make that final comparison. With all of the metal in this construction, this thing weighs in at a pretty substantial 6.8 ounces, 193 grams. But that is significantly lighter than the 9.4 ounces that the T-Rex weighs in your pocket. As for the design and fit and finish, considering what I paid for it, I am really impressed. Starting with the blade. All right, it's a clip point blade with a high flat saber grind and a very keen edge bevel. We'll see how it performs here in just a second. Brushed satin finish, all of the lines really crisp and clean, including, yes, they put tapered swedge on the back of the clip point. No, it's not sharp and shouldn't be for a folding knife. Some crisp jimping on the back of the spine, and they did leave the corners of the spine more than sharp enough to strike a ferro rod. And then they also added in, well, I'm going to call it a pair of short fullers that I can also use for deployment. Show you that here in a second. But first, the friendly end. Okay, it's a little bit curved on the sides, but they did very nicely dehorn all of the corners. Something I have to do when I get a knife with sharp corners is, well, make it more comfy for my delicate hands. Didn't have to do that here, and the fit of the scales is very clean. One potential deal breaker for you maybe is, well, we talked about that low profile pocket clip. It's not drilled out to move it anywhere. So you can't reverse it left to right or tip up, tip down. It's just one position. But since this is the position I commonly carry my knives in, it's fine for me. And yeah, they did add a little lanyard hole down here if you want to use that for something. But okay, one place you might have a concern, it is a liner lock, and it doesn't look like it's very beefy, but the use I put it to so far, which has included some hard use and some impact, you'll see the test footage here in a second, it stayed put. It hasn't failed, hasn't slipped, hasn't over-traveled like some knives I've reviewed. So yeah, it does the job. I'm not going to go out of my way to abuse it, but for the use I'm likely to put it to, it's probably adequate. And yeah, it's not sloppy or rough or anything like that. However, I did have to do one thing for my tastes. When it came to me, it was a smooth liner lock. And when I get a smooth liner lock, I'll almost immediately cut some serrations into it just to give my stubby thumbnail an easy place to positively engage to unlock the thing without slipping or fumbling. That's just a little change I made for myself. But where it really shines is in the deployment. Because like the T-Rex, this runs on ball bearings that are smooth as glass. Now there's a flipper tab, so I can use that, and that is a very quick positive opening. But speaking of how smooth it is, I've been using these fullers to just basically give it a pinch and a little bit of a push, because there is a really stiff detent in there for safety, so it's not going to open accidentally. But all I have to do is move the blade far enough to break the detent, and then it just falls open like butter. All right, using we'll call it my newer format where I talk you through the test results as I showed them to you. I didn't go crazy with this. I only did tests that made sense for a medium use folder of this size. I didn't throw it. I didn't baton or chop significantly with it. But starting with the Marshall tests, this is where I was curious about how it would perform. In other words, would it perform in a similar way to some of those fixed blade Puko style utility knives? So starting with my Pell, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper, so you get more resistance the deeper you penetrate into the media, and then that's backed up by my redwood target. Yeah, tip penetration was really impressive, which is what I expected it to be, especially using it in reverse grip. Yeah, really buried itself into the media and made a pretty good channel in that soft media while it was doing it. Now, then going straight into the redwood, I'm testing a couple of things. One is tip durability, because it is kind of a keen tip. I'm not trying to destroy it by driving it into the wood and twisting it sideways, but I want to see if the tip is going to hold up to hitting something, well, harder than soft media, which also might translate to some of the utility uses that we'll talk about here in just a second. But yeah, tip held up just fine and really buried itself into the wood. Had some struggles prying it out a few times again, especially in reverse grip. But speaking of grips, the other thing I'm looking for is grip security and comfort. Any uncomfortable collisions when that linear impact translates back into my hand? Does my hand slip, especially potentially slipping into danger? There is enough of a finger groove guard here that it did keep my hand from going into danger. Even surprisingly, okay, I'm using 4 grips. Forward grip with the edge facing away from me, conventionally, more North American buoy style with the edge facing towards me, which gives me potentially more cutting action in the arc of the stab. But I am concerned that I'll get more slippage here, and I really didn't. So pretty good secure grip here with little uncomfortable collision with, well, the flipper tab guard there. I felt that under especially heavier impact. Here, surprisingly, I'm a little worried about this one, my hand didn't go anywhere. But then in reverse grip, edge facing away from me and edge facing towards me, my hand didn't go anywhere. I did not have to lock my thumb up over the butt, and there were no uncomfortable collisions. So that was surprisingly impressive. We'll talk about Marshall handling more in just a bit. But the next test, which is kind of durability, kind of Marshall, is the bamboo test. To see if I can first induce chip or roll on a fragile edge. And even though this is a very keen edge, it survived the test just fine. But the other thing I tend to learn from the test is the nimbleness of the knife. Is it quick? And yeah, it is a quick, fast knife, responsive. I'm not trying to hack through the target, just hitting it with about the speed and pressure I use when I'm sparring fencing. But in the case of a folder, I'm actually testing one more thing. Is under that impact, does it loosen up at all? Does the lock over travel or fail? Does the build, does the pivot loosen up at all? And no, under impact, and as we're going to see under utility use, yeah, its lockup remains very secure for, again, what it is. But moving on to utility test. Again, I didn't do anything crazy. I did a spread of utility carving tasks. But in the month or so that I've had it, I've also used it to, well, do a lot of utility tasks around the house. So I've cut up a lot of cardboard and packaging, done some paint scraping and other things with it, done, yeah, a lot of food prep with it. It is a very nice, small paring size food prep knife. So I've gotten some good use out of that. Got a nice keen edge. And then in the tests, as you can see, I did some fine carving with it. Some fine carving. And yeah, it is a nice tool. some debarking. And then one of the things, I didn't use it to like chop any branches or anything like that or do any batoning with, but I did take some of those smaller, straighter branches and sharpen them into stakes with it. Oh, yeah. And, you know, I made some feathers with it. Yeah. Some nice curls. Make yourself a feather. And in all of those tasks, it worked really well, including driving the point down into my chopping block and pulling the media across it to make those curls. Yeah. As a field utility knife, it held up pretty well, and it was pretty comfortable, secure in my grip to use as an all-around light-duty utility knife. Post-test, edge test. Shaving sharp out of the box? Yes. Where is it now? On some paper. Oh, yeah. Just effortless. On cardboard. Oh, yeah. Like butter. Before we get to my thoughts on the potential martial usefulness of this knife, it's time to talk briefly about that balance between utility and martial usefulness that can make for an awesome overall EDC. And in the wise words of Jorge Prina, the knife that you use the most for the most things might then be most familiar to you should you have to use it even for, shall we say, other uses. In those situations I hope you never encounter in real life. But that can also help you out with optics. You have to be going anywhere where there are people who are sensitive to other people being armed, and some of those people might be law enforcement. Being able to justify your carry as a tool that looks more like a tool than a weapon might keep you out of some trouble. And I'm going to say you can very easily justify this as a tool because it's an awesome tool, and it does look like a lot of conventional, traditional utility folding knives. But also, always be aware of any local restrictions, regulations, laws. As I've mentioned, most places I go around here, I can carry pretty much any length of folding knife concealed. But there are a couple of municipalities in my state that have length restrictions. And then I'm going to have to leave this at home in favor of a shorter blade. But, all right, how would this one function in those, well, other situations? As a martial tool, I feel that this has all of the strengths and limitations of a blade of this profile and this length. What am I talking about? Let's start with those limitations. It's not a big Bowie knife, short sword, so I'm not going to be able to use it as a physical defensive tool. In other words, I would not be able to block, parry, displace another weapon with it. So my defense is going to be entirely reliant on what the rest of me is doing, or maybe what I've got in the other hand to pair this with. And those are things we might talk about in future videos. But also, even though it does have some belly and a very keen edge, in a real situation I wouldn't feel terribly confident with using that edge. Yes, it can slash. Yes, I can cut with it. Yes, I could even snap cut with it. But especially if I'm dealing with an opponent who's got thick clothing on, I just don't feel like it's going to be effective enough to rely on. I might be able to get that edge in the right place at just the right time. Not going to count on it. Might be able to make a flinch for an opening for something better. And what's the better? Well, what I can do with this tip combined with the security of this grip. Yeah, in all grips, penetration was awesome in thrusting and stabbing. And my hands stay put. I didn't worry about my hands slipping up into danger, even if I should encounter, shall we say, unexpected resistance in the target medium. But starting with forward grip edge facing away from me, yeah, I could get the tip on in either having a handshake grip or a saber grip, yeah, for extended thrusting or close range, more around the corner circular stabbing. Very effective. Should I reverse the edge towards me, North American Bowie style, it changes the engagement of the tip angle as compared to my arm, makes it more right angle naturally, better for getting around corners, but I also might be able to create natural cutting action in the arc of a stab, create a bigger channel, depending on how I'm engaging with that target media, so that's something to consider. And my hand's still secure, not going anywhere. In reverse grip, okay, now we need to talked about this in previous videos, what I call my short knife paradox. A longer blade in reverse grip for me gets kind of awkward. Not only do I feel like I have poor tip control, but I also feel like I lose leverage in doing any kind of slashing with the thing. Whereas with a shorter knife, not only do I feel like I have really good tip control and accuracy, but I also feel like I could push that edge into media at close range and make some use out of those attacks. Of course, the backstroke of any cut like that is going to be a stab. And with the edge facing away from me, yeah, it's hooking naturally into the stab. Penetration and channel was awesome. Grip, very secure and confidence inspiring. Edge facing towards me, grip still secure. Now I'm getting back cutting action on the stab, or I could use it for those back cutting slashing actions. But if you watch me do this, you'll see that the movement between the stab and the back cut is pretty much the same thing. The only real difference is how this is engaging with the target in a mobile chaotic situation. And sometimes I've found in live sparring it's either or depending on what happens, but since I can make use of both, yeah, it's a nice attack. Speaking of other things you could use this for, we did talk about full steel liners. It's probably not going to be great as a glass breaker and certainly not as a hammer, but could I use it as a less lethal impact tool? Yeah, and my grip's probably not going to go anywhere. I've got good solid security on that. But I think folded, it's also narrow enough that I could also use it like that. So yeah, extra tools in your toolbox. So yes, I've really come to appreciate the shorter, straighter profile pointy knives with the secure grips for what they can do, well, over the things that they can't do. Now, is this going to be as durable as a similar fixed blade? Probably not. But then I don't intend to do anything crazy with it. Should it fail, maybe I'll do a follow-up video, but the T-Rex has held up just fine. I expect this one will too, again, as long as I don't do anything stupid with it. But speaking of straight blades that are a little narrower, pointier, secure grip, martially might be better with the tip, but utility might still have very good function out of the edge, I did finally break down and get myself an SRK, or at least an SRKC, so stay tuned for the review on this. Until then, let's get our conversation going. If you have any questions about this knife or the T-Rex, or you want to make some recommendations on other great affordable folders that you found, keep those recommendations coming. But as always, until next time, thank you all so much for watching, liking, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, adding to our conversation, seeking me out on social media, and I hope to see you back for, okay, there will be more Hawk and Hatchet content, but I promise we'll be getting to the SRKC soon.